don't you, once you let us go live?
All right, looks like we're good for YouTube. Thanks, Jason.
Well, good afternoon. We are so pleased to see everyone today. We are going to kick off our community advisory group meeting and just go through our just standard kind of review. I'm going to pass it over to Ed first to do a little bit of a welcome, and then I'll pass it back to you, Ed, to review the meeting agenda.
Well, welcome everybody. I am Ed Washington. So happy to see all of you here, and even those of you that I cannot see, welcome aboard. And just want to say that for everybody who's getting ready to have a little bit of a long vacation in the next couple of days, we wish you all the very best. Be safe, enjoy your family, enjoy your kids. And I'll turn it back over to Lisa, who will run through all of the things that you need to know, and maybe a couple that you don't need to know, but just listen up. Lisa.
You might have heard this before, but we're going to go through it again because we want to make sure that those that are watching are able to make sure that they are fully able to access our community advisory group meeting tonight. I will just also add, I had someone in the community mention to me, it's nice to actually talk to you in person. I usually just watch you on YouTube, which was pretty alarming, but I will tell you that our community advisory group meetings are being watched, and we really appreciate having the community pay close attention to the work that's being done in this group, as well as within the program. So again, my name is Lisa Keohokalole Schauer, and I am one of the co-facilitators for the community advisory group. We want to review the closed captioning. So closed captions are available in English and in Spanish. The English closed captions are available within Zoom and YouTube, and users can follow this link to view both English and Spanish captions in a separate browser window. If you are in the Zoom meeting and you're interested in accessing the closed captions, there should be a small little closed caption icon that has CC listed on it right next to the raise hand button on the bottom of your screen, and that will allow you to access closed captions. We have ASL interpretation. As we've mentioned at previous meetings, this is an important part of how we are centering our commitment to equity. And our ASL interpreter will be on a spotlight video. So those that are watching from YouTube, you may see the ASL interpreter and the slide. You might not be able to see, but you can certainly hear the presenter. And that's really primarily because we want to ensure that the ASL interpreter is seen for those that are accessing this meeting and need that service. Webinar participation tips. We really appreciate you joining today. If you are joining by audio, your audio by phone or computer, we encourage you to choose one and not both. And keep your audio on mute when you're not speaking. If you experience technical difficulties, we'd ask that you just reach out to our program staff at 360-329-6744. Public input instructions. This is an important part of our meeting. We want to make sure that if you are calling in to provide public comment to our community advisory group, that you have these numbers handy. We'll also repeat these at the end of our meeting right before we go into the public comment period. The phone number that we'd like for you to utilize is 1-669-900-6833. We anticipate that we'll open up a brief period for public comment around 5:45 p.m. this evening. Our meeting ID is 993-5459-6043. The passcode is 674942. And you'll dial *9 to raise your hand. After you're invited to speak, you'll dial *6 to unmute yourself. Again, we will repeat these instructions later in our meeting, but wanted to make sure that you had these numbers handy if you're planning on providing public comment tonight. To submit comments after the meeting, we encourage you to submit comments via our info box at info@interstatebridge.org with CAG Public Comment in the subject line. We do provide all of our members of the community with any emails directly into this info box that list CAG Public Comment. Our members of the Community Advisory Group receive those emailed comments if we have received them as a program 48 hours in advance of each upcoming meeting. If you miss that 48-hour time period, then we do continue to ensure that our members do receive the correspondence. They'll just receive it in their next batch of information from the program. Please make sure that written comments explicitly say CAG Public Comment. We also have a phone number that you can call if you would prefer to give us a call and talk to us. In Washington, that number is 360-859-0494. In Oregon, it's 503-897-9218, or our toll-free number, 888-503-6735. We are hoping that a brief reminder of our member commitments and operating norms will help each of us to remember when the right moment might be to lean in and when the right moment might be to lean back. So we want to make sure that in all of our interactions with each other and with the community that we're putting relationships first, that we're keeping focused on our common goal, that we're noticing the power dynamics in the room. We're creating a space for multiple truths and norms. We're being kind and brave. We're practicing examining racially biased systems and processes, and we're looking for opportunities to learn. With that, I will pass it back on over to our co-chair, Ed Washington.
Yes, thank you very much, Lisa. This is always such a nervous moment for me. Meeting agenda. Well, we've had our welcome, and for those of you, if you were not on board when I did the first welcome, I'd like to just do it again. Today we'll be covering program updates, equity framework, transit options, community working groups, and what next, public comment, and then we'll be wrapping it up. Your other co-chair, Lynn Valenter, will be doing the wrap up. I have to go see the dentist today, so I've got to scoot out a little bit early. So I'd like to pass it back to next, whoever that is. Is Greg on next?
We are going to watch a quick video just before we get into Greg.
Excuse me. Thank you. I'm so sorry. I was so excited about getting to Greg. I jumped over the video, but we have a new video. It's called IBR, a case for IBR. And you may have seen that it was starring Irina Phillips. It's not, and it's not because she wasn't wanted. Last thing I heard about Irina, that someone saw her with her bags packed, heading across the old interstate bridge on her way to Hollywood. So you're just gonna have to deal with Andrew Horn, and perhaps after you see his fine performance, you might see him going across the bridge with a suitcase on his way to Hollywood. So that's my comment for the video. Okay, thank you.
The I-5 bridge replacement presents to all of us opportunity for prosperity, for federal investment in this critical piece of infrastructure, in jobs, desperately needed jobs, and dollars to come right here into our economy and to set us on a long-term trajectory for economic success. This is not just a Portland thing. This isn't just a regional thing. This is an entire West Coast thing. This is impactful from Vancouver, British Columbia, all the way down to our southern border. This means something for the ability of our entire West Coast to meet the needs of a growing economy. that is dependent on having infrastructure that's resilient and that can move goods and services in an efficient manner into our region, but then across the entire West Coast. This is the promise of substantial investment in our community. And for those that will see this played out in real time past this process that we're all involved in, it presents a future that is brighter than the one that we have right now. And so I see opportunity, I see optimism, and I see the possibility for transforming the way that we move around our region. So for businesses, we look at this project as being a must-have. And the Portland way is collaborative, and that's how this gets done. And that's what it will be for success, a successful outcome for this bridge replacement.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was absolutely fantastic. And we're going to hear from Greg next with a program update. Greg?
I can find the unmute button. Well, thank you. And I want to acknowledge first Andrew Horn. That video was outstanding. Andrew also had a editorial that just came out on the importance of infrastructure and the importance of the I-5 bridge to this region and to the West Coast of the United States. So Andrew, thank you for your support and thank you for the fine job in the video. So once again, if you have ambitions to be on the big screen, we're interested in hearing from more folks about their bridge stories. So thank you in advance. So August has been a fascinating month. We did not have an executive steering group meeting. We did not have a bi-state ledge, but I feel that August was busier than any other previous month. We've been gathering data and starting the analysis portion to answer those 4 key questions that I've mentioned to you before. What is the mode of high capacity transit that will go across the bridge? And you're going to hear a presentation that talks about the process of getting to options and the process of screening those options down to one that will be a part of the IBR solution. So the second question is the number of lanes. And once again, we're gathering data about the number of vehicles, how many crashes occur, how many hours of congestion still occur in this corridor. We're going to be looking at, and you're going to hear about working groups that are going to be looking at the Hayden Island interchange and whether that interchange directly off of I-5 should be there or should it come off of Marine Drive. So some big questions. We're also digging into the replacement of the North Portland Harbor Bridge. But once again, those are the 4 key questions that we're going to be focusing on for the next number of months to come up with an IBR solution by early to mid-January, and taking this to all of our advisory groups for input, taking it to our partners for their councils and input, and finally at the end of March, taking it to the bi-state ledge group for their approval to move this forward in the process to take it to our federal partners. So it's been a busy time. We've been talking to a lot of people, and we're going to be talking to a whole bunch more people in this time frame. So if I know a number of you represent community-based organizations, if you need the IBR team to help make a presentation to your group or groups you know of, let us know. We will we will be talking to any and everybody and doing a lot of outreach during this time period to make sure everyone's voice is heard. So we are coming up next month, or later this month is September already. So we're coming up on executive steering group in mid-September, as well as a bi-state ledge. And the bi-state ledge has requested that we meet monthly from here on out until we have a IBR solution in front of them. So you will be hearing more and direct comments from our bi-state legislative group. And they have requested that we bring representatives from our different advisory groups to report directly to them at some of their future meetings. So you may be tapped on the shoulder to come and talk about your experiences and the engagement you've had with the IBR program. So it has been busy. You're going to hear once again about the transit partners who have been in the room and are looking at how transit is going to play out in this corridor. One of the most stickiest issues that this program presents. So those are the things that we've been doing with the program. And I will take any questions that you guys may have before we jump into the meat of the meeting.
I just want to say I appreciate for opening up the opportunity to have a presentation at the community-based organizations. I know from an NAACP standpoint, we'll probably take advantage of that.
Once again, if you give us notice, we will have either myself or one of our team members. We'd be happy to make those presentations. This is a key critical time in the program, and we want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to hear what we are trying to accomplish and to give their input. Other questions, concerns? So the next slide we have, if we can flip to the next slide. Maybe. No, go. So this is just a reminder of the roles that the different groups play. Once again, the program administrator box is actually should be the program administration team that we're responsible for making informed decisions. And those decisions are based on what we hear from our advisory groups, what we hear from our engagement, and what we hear from our executive steering group. So we also have a box to the far right that talks about the other decision makers with authority, our federal partners, our permitting agencies, the transportation commissions. So all of these are inputs to the program, and we're taking all of this to the bi-state legislative committee. So the IBR solution will follow this same decision-making process. So we will be asking you with your red, green, and yellow cards when we get to that time of, here we are, you've seen the process, here's the IBR solution that the data has driven us to, and we're going to give you opportunity to weigh in and ask as many questions as you need so we can move this forward. So once again, the key date is the end of March, where we will be taking all of your comments, all of your advice forward to the bi-state legislative committee so they can hear it and once again tell us to go forward or tell us we need to look at things in a different way. So this is going to be a key inflection point for the program. And the next slide, I think, is my last one. And this talks about the consensus building process and who will be participating and the technical staff groups that are giving us information, the advisory groups, as well as the listening sessions that we are doing throughout the communities. Those things will continue to go forward. So with that, I will turn it back to Jason, I believe. Or Johnell.
And we'll go straight into Johnell.
Great. Well, thank you, Administrator Johnson, and good afternoon, everyone. Great to see everyone almost here in fall, the last summer days amongst us here. I have the pleasure of presenting the equity framework. You'll recall that we had planned to really unpack this material at our last meeting, and we wanted to not rush the climate discussion, and so we added it to today's agenda. But before I kind of go through a couple of slides, I do want to recognize and acknowledge the Equity Advisory Group facilitator, Dr. Roberta Hunt, as well as our program equity lead, Jake War. But Dr. Hunt, I'd like to open it up to you first to kick us off here.
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. I think you can hear me okay. It's great to be here, and shout out to Mr. Washington. I'm always glad to be around you. So I get to talk to you a little bit about our work with the Equity Advisory Group. Just move over. All right, so we have been meeting parallel to you all, and we are working to define the equity framework, which Johnell is going to talk a little bit more about. And when you think about the equity framework, not flamework. When you think about the equity framework, think of it as a blueprint, right? So when we are focusing on equity, we are really thinking, how can we infuse both values and planning and consciousness within the bridge project that centers the needs of the most marginalized within our community, and that really kind of prioritizes the needs of people of color, low income people, and people with disabilities. So we want to make sure that we are, that as this bridge is being built, that it does not cause disparate burden on those groups, and where possible can actually be more of a benefit, right? And what we know from an equity kind of analysis is that as we think about the needs of the most impacted within our community, so do we benefit all of our community. So we are working on the framework or blueprint. And one way to think of it is that that we want to address what's wrong. We want to think about how to fix it, and we want to think about how do we measure it, right? To know that we did what we said we wanted to do. Our equity advisory group is informing the design process by developing recommended screening criteria to evaluate different design options. So when we're thinking about our screening criteria, as you all are going to talk about transit options and whatnot, which is like the hot ticket discussion piece, we want to think, how do we infuse equity and an awareness of equity so that all of us benefit into the determining of like which design options are good for our region. We're hoping to finalize our framework in October, which will include tools for the program to infuse equity into its decision making. And as we think about tools, tools are an equity lens, which essentially are kind of questions that we measure each decision, each choice point against, and some other instruments that the program team will use and which will be shared. We have our next meeting, September 20th. We welcome you, and we welcome you to observe. Around the table, we have some excellent folks from around our region, both on the Portland side and on the Vancouver side. And what I value about the folks around the table is that they really hold the groups that they represent in their thinking. And so, you know, we have a number of disability rights activists at the table, really helping us think through what does equity mean for people with disabilities. And we also recognize that all of us have multiple identities. And so we want to be very conscious of the intersectional identities that we hold and the intersectional needs that we have. Yeah, so I think that is, I think Johnell, you have a presentation for us, but that kind of gives an overview of what we're doing. We also have a lot of folks who are representing different communities of color, different freight communities, different environmental advocacy groups. So it's a real representative of both nonprofit and municipal government, and and some folks who are just ordinary community members, but who hold a desire for fairness and a real kind of redressing of wrongs that have happened in the past when our region has approached the building of highways. So it's exciting. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Hunt. And we're so fortunate to have your leadership as our facilitator of the Equity Advisory Group. So I'm going to go through a couple of slides, and then we'll take questions towards the tail end. So be thinking about your key questions or comments or recommendations. So next slide, please. As Dr. Hunt indicated, we are developing an equity framework, and here you'll see just a purpose. The core of it is, what does it mean to really achieve equity through the interstate bridge replacement program, and how we will achieve it. The framework is sort of our North Star by which we will achieve more equitable outcomes. It's a blueprint, and it's an essential step of the IBR equity advancement strategy. So next slide, please. Elements of an equity framework, really unpacking this very technical word. In fact, we'll be moving away from framework more towards blueprint because we think that actually captures sort of what it means more sort of accurately. But the elements of the framework, first, the program equity definition. You'll recall that the Equity Advisory Group recommended a definition that was adopted by the program. We'll review that here in just a second. The equity objectives, which is what do we want to achieve? It's real important for us to be super clear about our desired outcomes. Otherwise, equity is just another interesting word without any accountability or specific outcomes. And so a lot of what the EAG is helping us think through are our desired outcomes. Measures of success. What do we want to measure and how will we measure it? The old adage, what you measure, you get. And that's exactly true with respect to equity as well. And then how do you operationalize all of this? You put it into action. And how this shows up, as Dr. Hunt indicated earlier, our community engagement approach, the conversations we're having relative to design, and then eventual construction specifications. Those are all of the ways in which we plan to operationalize kind of equity components. Next slide, please. So I'll go through kind of the sections of our equity framework. Section 1 is the context and background. We know that this region, in particular this corridor, has rich history, some of it very challenging history relative to communities of concern. And we start off in the framework really acknowledging this history and understanding how that history informs the way in which some communities engage this project, as well as the ways in which they don't engage. And so that's really important. We also talk about our program equity commitment, and we conduct a fair amount of demographic analysis and overview. Next slide, please. The second section is really around our definition of equity. And I'll just read this because each time I do, I think it's just a reminder. And incidentally, we searched all across the nation to really determine whether or not equity is really being integrated and sort of emphasized in any mega program. And we could not find any good examples nationally. So I think all of you should be proud, and certainly we are proud that we are on the cutting edge here. We're really creating and setting a new promising and best practice as to how you really engage and embed equity into a program of this magnitude. So we define equity in terms of both process and outcomes. Process equity means that the program prioritizes access, influence, and decision-making power for marginalized and underserved communities throughout the program in establishing objectives, design, implementation, and evaluation of success. Outcome equity is a result of successful process equity and is demonstrated by tangible transportation and economic benefits for marginalized and underserved communities. Process equity and outcome equity contribute to addressing the impacts of and removing longstanding injustices experienced by these communities. It's real important. We start off from the frame to think about this program as a way to disproportionately benefit historically marginalized communities. Oftentimes in transportation, is seen through the lens of really mitigating impact. And what we know is that that's not enough. If we really are committed to equity, we have to think about this program as a way by which to lift communities who have been left behind. And so that's the premise that we start off with. Next slide, please. Our overarching objectives that are guiding this work program, and I won't read all of these, but it's helpful to point out we have 6 critical objectives: mobility and accessibility, physical design, community benefits, economic opportunity, decision-making processes, and then of course, what traditionally falls within the context of environmental justice is avoiding further harm. And so oftentimes, as I indicated, infrastructure projects just focus on avoiding further harm, and that's their kind of checking the equity box. Administrator Johnson has put this program with more of an emphasis and a charge to get beyond that And what the Equity Advisory Group has been really helping us think through are each of these objectives. Each of these objectives will follow through with very specific performance measures. And so, for example, when we talk about physical design, how do we integrate equity into the physical design elements of the program? That's particularly true as we're thinking about how do we ensure that the eventual bridge achieves goals for persons with disabilities. And so some of the concepts that you may have heard are concepts such as universal design, right? How do we build in a way that allows all to really access our infrastructure? When we're looking at economic opportunity, it's really about ensuring that economic opportunities generated by the program, including contracting and workforce development, substantially benefit minority and women-owned firms, workers of color, workers with disability, and young people. So that is where we will get into setting specific targets and goals relative to the workforce, as well as our DBE participation. But also we have a unique opportunity of really holding ourselves accountable and setting rigorous goals with respect to persons with disabilities. What we know from our equity analysis is this corridor has a disproportionate amount of persons with disabilities relative to the overall population. Next slide, please. And then section 3 is how do we, again, operationalize equity. This is where we'll get into indicators and performance measures. How will we know we are making progress towards our equity objectives? This will also include some of the work that we've been doing these past several months with the Equity Advisory Group relative to our equity screening criteria, strategies, how will we meet the desired indicators, process and outcome equity commitments, activities and accountability. What is a timeline and who is responsible to implement each strategy, and then our equity toolkit. So a lot is packed into this North Star document. Next slide, please. And then as we indicated, there are going to be a number of tools. Again, just having this equity framework is not enough. We need to make sure that we have tools along the way through each of the milestones by which we can conduct comprehensive equity analyses. Some of how we'll do that, we'll talk about in a minute. An equity index, an equity lens. We're going to conduct a best practice review nationally to determine, again, what others are doing in terms of some of these areas. Mitigation and equity enhancement commitments, as well as other elements. Next slide. Jake, I'm going to ask you to go through these next slides for the group.
Sure. Thanks, Johnell. And hi, everybody. Good afternoon / evening. So one of the things that's part of our equity framework, one of the tools is an equity index, as Johnell mentioned. And the idea behind that is looking at the geography of our program area and the surrounding area and of our region, and trying to identify using demographic information, kind of where there are communities concentrated, that if we are prioritizing equity, those are kind of the areas we want to focus on. We want to measure the impacts to those areas. We want to see how we can improve mobility for the residents of those areas. And so we developed a sort of index. This has become a pretty common practice in planning generally and in transportation planning, where we took the communities that we've listed in our equity definition. That wasn't included on the slide, but there's on the full definition, there's the list of communities. So we included those and we assigned a point value to geographic areas where those communities are higher than the regional average. And so those are listed there with BIPOC populations being weighted higher, receiving more points to make this a really race forward approach. Next slide, please. So what that ends up looking like, and I know not everyone loves maps as much as I do, but maybe some of you do. So what that ends up looking like is shown here, where you've got program area, you've got the blue lines throughout that are transit routes, bus routes for C-Tran and TriMet. You've got the max yellow line, you've got C-Trans, the Vine bus rapid transit, and then a coloration scheme where the darker green it is, the more points that area got on this equity index. So essentially, the more of these communities that are concentrated in these areas. So this gives you kind of an idea of relative to the program area where there are some concentrations. You see right in downtown Vancouver is a 6 or 7 point area. To the east of I-5 and just under SR 500, which isn't labeled there, but it's just to the east of the program area, and the Vine goes through it. You have some really high concentrations of a lot of these communities. And so we're in our analysis, we'll look at what do the different options for an IVR solution mean to these areas. Does it improve access to jobs? How far can someone get on transit? Those sorts of analyses that'll inform our overall solution. Next slide. All right, Johnell, do you want to take this back?
Great, thank you, Jake, for that. Another element is our equity lens, and we'll come back to talk more about the equity lens. But essentially, an equity lens is both a formal and informal tool. We like to quote Multnomah County on this. The formal is a transformative quality improvement tool used to improve planning, decision-making, and resource allocation, leading to more racially equitable policies and programs. So it's a set of questions that each of our teams can really ask throughout the process. And at its core, it's really an informal mindset. Are we considering how communities of concern might be impacted? How so? A real simple way to think about this is all the questions that were not asked prior to building, for example, the freeway system through Albina, for example. And so these are questions to help us ensure that we are considering both potentially negative as well as potentially positive impacts on communities of concern as defined by our definition. Next slide, please. So big picture equity lens questions at the core: what decisions is being made? Who is at the table? How are decisions being made? What assumptions are at the foundation of the issue? And what is the likely impact? And so that's our work. That's the challenge that we have, is to ponder and pause such that we are doing this in a holistic way that considers equity. Next slide. So I know that was a lot thrown at you. We try to be brief, hopefully brilliant, and would love to answer any questions that you all might have, and look forward to coming back to you in the future as we make more progress on the equity framework.
So Johnell, I'll just go ahead and affirm that it was absolutely brilliant. And with that, Ryan, I think you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. In the kind of the equity objectives and the economic opportunity, you call out for benefit for minority and women-owned firms, and then workers of color, workers with disabilities, and young people. And I feel if we're calling those out, we should also get in there indigenous people as well. These are ceded lands, therefore that we should be, calling out that the indigenous people in that piece as well. And I don't know about Cowlitz, but I know Grand Ronde, we have our own, tribal employment office, and we're happy to kind of make connections for get workers out there, or firms part of the design. But I think we should be calling that, that piece out there in there as well.
Appreciate that comment, and agreed. We'll work with you and others to figure out how we can really ensure that we're being mindful of the rich history, tribal history. That's one of the things we are hoping to unpack even further in the historical context as well. And we'll continue to work with you on that.
Thank you.
Martha, you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to verify that LEP stands for Limited English Proficiency.
That's correct.
Okay.
Limited English proficiency, which of course is out of Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and then I noticed you brought in the formal definition of the equity lens from Multnomah County, but there it sounded like they are really focused on racial inequality. And I feel like we are looking at more things than just that. So I just wanted to see if we were going to have a formal definition. The bridge program would have its own formal definition that would allow other things besides racial inequality to be included.
Great question. I think I would amend it to say not besides, but in addition to race, because race, we follow the notion of intersectionality. And what we know is traditionally and historically in this region, the worst outcomes have been directly tied to race. But you are correct, and our definition is much broader than race, and we include a number of other significant, important populations. That example was just used to illustrate sort of a broader view of an equity lens. And so we can certainly take a look at that language. That's just used as an example of what an equity lens is. So appreciate the comment.
I would also add, Johnell, race and is a core piece of this work. And we have many identities, but if we don't actively put race on the table, it is often taken off the table.
Thank you. I'm not, somebody just, okay, Diana, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you calling. I was just curious about thinking about environmental justice rather than equity, using an equity lens or the various tools that you have there. So really just where centering community comes in. We're talking about air pollution, of course, and then, transportation mobility pieces and community, other ways communities can travel other than vehicle and public transit and safety. So I'm curious I see all the equity language and tools, but I'm just wanting to understand where you see justice fitting in, or if you do at all.
Dr. Hunt, do you want to take that one on?
I really appreciate you bringing up environmental justice. And we think about environmental justice as ensuring that the environment around people where they eat, pray, play, and work is healthy and supportive of their long-term health and well-being. And as we think about the equity lens, environmental justice is absolutely a part of that. And as we work on the different ways that we are framing that is in our mind. And one thing I am hearing from what you said is that the language needs to be stronger in identifying the connection to environmental justice. But that is embedded within the work.
Thank you. Greg?
So I would just echo what Dr. Hunt. We recognize to use the words of my friend Johnell, the intersectionality of climate and equity. And we know it's generally the folks who have been traditionally at the bottom of the economic ladder who endure the environmental degradation to their community. So we recognize that crosswalk between those two issues, and we are addressing that intersectionality in our framework for both climate and equity. So you will see some similar ties. But another thing I also wanted to mention is that our program and our efforts on equity are getting national press. I was asked to participate in the Congressional Black Caucus Brain Trust, where we had a round table of 7 folks talking about equity and technology. Johnell and myself have been asked to participate on a national call to talk about equity in transportation. Our federal partners have asked for once again, myself and Johnell to work with them and explain what we are doing on this program, to talk about the Equity Advisory Group and all our efforts that we are trying to put in place. So this is not going unnoticed, the things that this program is trying to do in recognizing that equity has to be a part of mega projects, transportation projects moving forward. So just wanted to throw that out, that we are, folks are noticing what we are trying to get done.
Terrific. Thank you. And it's nice to know our region is a leader. That always, I think, makes us all feel good. And shout out to Johnell, Dr. Hunt, and all of the members of the Equity Advisory Group. I think they've been digging in and we will all benefit. We will have a transit presentation shortly, but before we go there, I want to turn it back over to Lisa Keohokalole Schauer to talk about our next steps.
Nice job, Lynn. Well, I want to just give a little bit of context around this transit presentation. So Johnell and Jason and I often have conversations with Ed and Lynn and Greg around what you've asked for and how, as a program, we can deliver that to you at the pace at which the program is moving through the process. And right now, our engineers and our planners, our technical team is really digging into the data, and they're looking at what has changed, what do we need to update. They have not concluded any sort of solution yet, but we're on a pace where we're hoping to be able to reach the milestones that Greg has outlined and that has been framed previously as kind of our North Star targets. And in order for us to be able to ensure that the community advisory group members have enough information to help authentically weigh in on where we're headed, we need to be able to bring you up to speed. And we try to do that a little bit at a time. But this presentation that Kelly is going to give, who's one of our transit leaders, is really very much around this idea of where we've been and where we are now. And I suspect, given my interaction with several of you, you're going to be anxious to talk about where we're headed and dive into those details. And so I just want to preface this with, we're not quite there yet. Intentionally. We really do want to make sure, though, that as we move towards being able to start to look at the data that is being analyzed, that you're able to weigh in with your feedback. So we'll do a breakout session right after Kelly presents, where we'll talk a little bit about kind of not only what you heard, what you saw, what your perspective is, and then what feedback you have for us. But we anticipate being able to take each of these elements of what becomes this multimodal design solution, breaking it up and looking at where we've been historically, where we are now, and where we're headed, and then asking for your feedback. So just wanted to kind of pop in a bit and give you a little bit of kind of expectations around this dialogue about transit. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kelly, who is going to do an incredible job of being able to not only bring you up to speed, but make sure that you have enough information to know how we're looking at this transit integration into our overall multimodal solution. So Kelly?
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you everyone for taking some of your precious time this afternoon to be with us. My name is Kelly Betteridge, and I'm on the transit team for the IBR program. Great, thank you. So in order to make sure we're all on the same page about the material that I am presenting tonight, I want to share that the transit mode will be part of the overall multimodal design solution. Excuse me, sorry. And selecting a transit mode will not be separated from the overall design options. That CAG members have asked for more information regarding the transit mode process and selection from previous planning efforts. And this presentation is a historical review of the process and decision for the selection of one component of the multimodal design alternatives. Many of the slides that you'll see tonight are taken directly from a presentation that was given in 2008 from the previous program. And this presentation is not a recommendation for one specific transit alternative, nor a conclusion that the transit mode decision has been made. And it's also not foreshadowing of the process we will use for selecting the multimodal design alternative for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. Next, please. Thank you. The IBR team is currently working towards developing one multimodal design solution. We're updating information and analyzing what has changed since the previous planning effort, as well as working with the executive steering group partners to develop numerous transit options, which include both mode and alignment. We will be bringing to the CAG and EAG key decision elements, design elements for review and input this fall. We'll provide a review of the previous planning efforts for historical context, much like the presentation that I'm giving tonight. We will share our current status of the information review and analysis, and we anticipate bringing a draft multimodal design solution to the CAG EAG in early 2022. Community involvement will also be a focus this fall. In October, the program will launch an information campaign to ensure the public understands the status of the program and how they can provide input, and when we will seek additional input. And then in November, we'll seek engagement and input from the public on specific design elements. We'll also seek input from the CAG and EAG on questions we should ask the public in order to influence the draft design solution. Next, please. Great. As we begin this process with the goal of getting to a single transit option that will be nested within the larger program, I want to take a big step back and ground this discussion in the project purpose and need. Here, I've actually highlighted the purpose and need specific to transit. There are, of course, many elements to the purpose and need, but for today, I just wanted to highlight their item B, which is to improve connectivity, reliability, travel times, and operations of public transportation modal alternatives in the bridge influence area. Next, please. The project need, which I'll read because it is fairly detailed, is the specific needs to be addressed by the proposed action, meaning the project, is that limited public transportation operation, connectivity, and reliability due to limited public transportation options. A number of transportation markets are not well served. The key transit markets include trips between the Portland Central City and the City of Vancouver and Clark County, trips between North and Northeast Portland in the City of Vancouver and Clark County, and trips connecting the City of Vancouver and Clark County with the regional transit system in Oregon. Current congestion in the corridor adversely impacts public transportation service reliability and travel speed. Southbound bus travel times across the bridge are currently up to 3 times longer during parts of the AM peak compared to off-peak. Travel times for public transit using general purpose lanes on I-5 in the bridge influence area are expected to increase substantially by 2030. So this is language taken directly from the draft environmental impact statement. Next, please. Great, thank you. During the DEIS for the previous project, they used a number of screening criteria, including alignment with the purpose and need, which I just read, in order to get to 5 preferred alternatives. So you can sort of see this process of components, fewer components, aligning those components into alternatives, and then ultimately sort of 5 alternatives made their way back out. And so next slide, please. In regard to transit, those 5 options are listed here. So the first one is a no build. And for those who may not be familiar with this type of environmental process, you always have to have an option where essentially you don't have a project that moves forward, and you use this as a way to measure the impact of one of the built options. Then there were 2 options that included bus rapid transit and 2 options that included light rail. Go to the next slide. Great. In analyzing all of the options for high capacity transit, there were these general findings that came out. So with either BRT or LRT, it was just found that high capacity transit alternatives that were measured increased transit use significantly over the no build. And that was that first option where there wasn't a project. It was also found that high capacity transit and express buses are needed in order to serve the forecasted transit markets. We talked about those markets a bit in the need, but understanding that there would be a high capacity transit investment, but that you would also continue to operate express buses in order to serve all of those markets. There's also a strong 2030 transit market for reliable, fast, frequent, and more accessible transit service. Of course, delays associated with the lift span degraded transit reliability. High capacity transit modes and exclusive guideways increase reliability and decrease delay. Exclusive guideway meaning that that is the right of way for which that vehicle can operate, and not anything else can get into that right of way. So there was a substantial cost difference, both in terms of capital costs as well as operating cost between light rail and BRT, and that the remaining transit modes could be optimized for better performance, which is to say, in the draft environmental impact statement, we're looking at sort of representative alignments, and once one is selected, then there's lots of opportunities to make that the best possible option for the program. Next slide, please. So again, both bus rapid transit and light rail transit were recommended, and each of them also included pros and cons. So this is one of those slides where I'm taking this information directly from what was published in 2008. So for bus rapid transit, the pros were that it significantly increased transit use compared to the 2030 no build, that any bus could use the exclusive guideway that would be created with the project. It had a lower capital cost, the cost to build the actual infrastructure. Between the 2 options, it was lower capital cost, that it did support local and regional transportation plans in both Oregon and Washington. And the cons for bus rapid transit were that it had the highest operating cost, that bus access in downtown Vancouver was constrained in order to be able to fit all of the buses that were necessary, and that there was decreased reliability due to operations in I-5 lanes south of the bridge influence area. And this is one of those options where optimizing a project design could really address some of these issues with reliability. Next slide, please. For light rail transit, the pros were that it significantly increased transit use compared to the 2030 no build. Again, it had the highest passenger capacity, so it could move the most people. It had the highest travel time reliability, because at this point, when we were measuring options, light rail traversed entirely in a dedicated right of way, and BRT had a few places where it came out in order to transfer to light rail. It takes advantage of existing light rail infrastructure, so meaning it could tie into the existing yellow line. It provided a 1-seat ride from Vancouver to Portland, which means that somebody who was in Vancouver and wanting to go to Portland wouldn't need to make a transfer. It had the lowest operating cost between the 2 modes, and it best supported the local and regional plans. And then the cons were that it had the highest capital cost, so the cost to actually build the infrastructure, and it was less flexible than bus modes. Next slide, please. Thank you. So based on that information, at the end of the draft environmental impact statement, there was a process to develop the locally preferred alternative. And so at that time, it was identified that that preferred alternative would include 4 elements. It was a replacement I-5 bridge, improvements to closely spaced highway interchanges, a light rail extension to Clark College, and pedestrian and bicycle facility improvements. the task force voted 37-2 to select this preferred alternative and the resolution that went along with it. Maybe I'll just say it's very common for the preferred alternative to just include a few high-level items. And then once that decision is made, then more detail is added to the program in order to define the rest of the elements. Thank you. So in July of 2008, each of the local sponsor agencies took the preferred alternative to their voting board in order to have it recommended. And so that is something that from a federal funding perspective, that's a necessary step, but also just from a regional perspective, that's a necessary step where essentially everyone says, yes, we're on board. These are the key components of the project. Let's move forward. Each of the local sponsor agencies, when they were adopting the locally preferred alternative, also made a number of conditions, which is very common to say, yes, I agree on these high-level deal points, but there's some other things I would really like you to research as we move forward. And so there's a couple of examples there, like needing to do an independent review of greenhouse gas analysis or some questions around tolling. Then in July of 2008, the preferred alternative was adopted into the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Regional Transportation Plan. So that represents both of the metropolitan planning organizations in Oregon and Washington. Just as a summary, that previous project that was included as the preferred alternative, like I said, was an extension of the yellow line, which currently terminates at Expo, to a terminus near Clark College. It had 5 new light rail stations, 1 at Hayden Island, 3 in the Central Business District, and then 1 at the terminus. And it also included 3 park and rides. And this is just to give context to what that project was. And that concludes the information that I had planned to present as we sort of talk about the past. I want to hand it back to Lisa in terms of next steps.
Thank you, Kelly. So we actually have a little bit more time. We really appreciated at our last community advisory group meeting dialogue around the climate framework. We also anticipated there might be quite a bit of dialogue around both the equity blueprint and this topic on transit. So what we're thinking at this point is to go ahead and move into breakout sessions, have some conversations, maybe ask some questions, and then allow for some time for a group conversation together. So if we could go ahead and move on over into our breakout sessions. I see you unmuting, Brent.
Yep, just want to confirm that 15 minutes is still a lot of time.
Jason, you want to do maybe 20?
I think 20 right now would be good for us. Yeah.
Okay, so let's do 20 minutes. You'll have kind of a room facilitator and then also someone who, as is typical form for our community advisory group meeting, will take some notes on a Jamboard. We would like to have one member of each group plan to kind of report out for the group. So let's see if we can find someone to volunteer in each of those groups. There'll be 4 groups, and really appreciate everyone's willingness to jump on into this topic and ask questions, provide comments. We've got some really good kind of leading questions that we want to show you and get your feedback on. So with that, why don't we head on over to the breakout sessions?
All right, starting now. welcome everyone on YouTube. We're about 10 minutes away from the community advisory group members joining us again. If you'd like to give public comments, please do so by giving a phone call to 1-669-900-6833. The meeting ID is 993-5459-6043 with a passcode of 674942. Dial *9 to raise your hand, and a facilitator will call on you to provide your public comment. It is *6 to unmute. Please provide your name and affiliation, and we look forward to hearing from you. Again, for those of you joining us up on YouTube, we do have about 8.5 minutes left to go in the breakout rooms, and look forward to seeing you back in the main session. Hi, Tom. How are you? Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm doing good, except I broke my ankle.
Oh, horrible to hear about that. We are in breakout rooms. Were you in a breakout room or are you just now joining us?
I just joined. I just got in.
Okay. Well, there's about a minute left in the breakout rooms. So do you want to hang out or would you like to join a room?
Whatever you think's best.
Let's have you. Let's have you just hang out for here now, Tom. Appreciate you joining.
Okay.
I can't believe you broke your ankle. I hope you heal quick and heal back to whole. That's the goal, right?
Well, I went to Canada to go fishing, and I was scouting, and I fell down a little short cliff. So there was no fishing.
Does anyone from our group want to do the report out?
My group just had me pick someone, so.
I can do.
Oh, Irina? Okay, wonderful. And do you have the link to the Jamboard?
I will, John, I'll share my screen and I'll go
Okay.
group by group on the
Right.
boards.
Thank you.
We were group 2. So I don't know when they're going to call us, what order they're going to call.
Jason, do you just want to pull up the Jamboard and we'll just start with the first group and go from there?
Absolutely.
That's your group.
That is, and everybody we had a great conversation, but nobody jumped up right away to report. So I will talk a lot. We had a great conversation, and a lot of it was focused around the cost and funding, both in terms of locally, how are things going to be funded and paid for on both sides of the river, as well as in terms of transit mode, does funding from the feds, is it contingent on what type of transit mode? As you can see. And then we also talked about the data, what has changed, what are we measuring, where are we starting, and as you can see, need the change between 2008 to now to be more clearly defined. And then, of course, where are the operating costs coming from and who pays for them? And is that also contingent on what type of transit mode? So if it was all light rail, is that just TriMet? If it's bus rapid transit, is that C-Tran and TriMet? And then also very important to think about what has transpired in Clark County to the east. Talk about travel times. What are we actually considering in the transit analysis? And that was a bit more of a lengthier question that hopefully we can come back to. And then again, in data, do we ultimately know where commuters are headed right now? And has that changed from previous analysis to now. So those were kind of the questions. I'm happy to have anybody from our group. I was lucky to have Kelly back me up on some of these questions if I didn't quite capture us.
Okay, who's going first?
Okay, I think I'm wrapping up for our group number 2. So we had very good discussion, and it was kind of like free flow. So we, on the first question, we came up with the approaches or what we need to consider. We need to consider the ridership capacity. So we shouldn't be planning for the current COVID conditions, but for the future. And then we talked about that technology might be changing, and it makes sense that maybe automotive vehicles are going to be the main mode of transportation, and the transit should take these into account. On the second question, what was the most important factor? We were talking about reliability, time, cost, and convenience and ease of use. And kind of like accommodate everybody. We had the person who spoke that the senior citizens, their kind of like important parameters are not taken into account when we develop the transit. On the next question, how could the existing connections be improved? Again, it's kind of like think as a system, make the connections between different modes of transportation easier, and kind of like also think about scheduling that fits the real conditions. And one person mentioned an anecdote that it took 1.5 hours waiting to ride 2 buses to connect over the bridge between Oregon and Washington. And it's kind of like, what's the point of transit if it takes that long? And what questions should be asked? Should we ask the public to solicit their feedback? We talked about public view, kind of like reach and explain to people the big picture and how the public will benefit from transit development. And then we also took kind of like private view and mentioned that just ask the question to the people, what would cost the public for them to ditch the car and use the transit to perform whatever tasks they had in mind to do. Okay, who else wants to contribute for our group too? Private view and
hello.
Hey, Jason, looks like we have a member of the public for public comment, but we'll wait for that until later. So yeah, with the last numbers of 6422, go ahead and wait a little bit and we'll call on you in a minute here.
Why don't we go to the next group?
All right, I am going to be presenting on behalf of our group. So in terms, we just kind of were like bouncing ideas off of each other. We had the question stems, but I don't know if we really followed them to a T. But we were discussing a lot about affordability. So making sure that transit is affordable and attractive for everyone to use. Our group took a lot of outside experiences that we have using public transit. So some overseas experience, just cities that have a more transit dependent environment and like what that looks like for everyday users, just because living in areas like Clark County, your experience using things like MAX and light rail type transportation might not be as robust as someone who lives in, let's say, New York City. And so just understanding that there is that contextual value of the people from this community not necessarily having the same experiences with public transit. We also discussed about safety and, making sure that when you're presenting the idea of this to the public, that safety is at the forefront, because that's what a lot of people tend to worry about when taking public transit, is their safety. We also talked about, let's see, what reasons to use public transit. So we talked about some people use it for work, some people want to use it just for like weekend shopping trips, and really wouldn't use public transit in the way that you might think that the way you might think it would be used for like commuter purposes. So considering that as well. And then making sure that we're improving mobility for the bridge, so that everyone is able to use it. I know that was echoed in the last group, was just making sure that it's accessible to everyone. And then accessibility barriers just in like how to use transit systems. Again, I think that that's another thing that within our community, we don't have the same experiences using this type of public transit every single day. And so just that might be a barrier to people wanting to use it, is that they just don't know how. I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in, but yeah, it was just a lot of really good discussion about like why we should use it, and basically like a case for yes, because our group was pretty cohesive in agreeing that it was something that we wanted to see.
This is Dina Horton. I'll jump in real quick for a quick second. I think one of the other things that was highlighted, which Sherry Call brought up, was that the more cars that we can get off of the bridge, the more freight capacity it frees up, and the ability for the reliability and less congestion on the bridge to be able to get freight moving, and how that could potentially affect the price of goods, and taking that into account and making sure that folks understand that the longer it takes for stuff to get to you, the higher the cost of the goods. And so that's something from an equity lens, if we're looking at trying to make things affordable for people, that's a factor to consider. So that was a great point, Sherry. I didn't want that to get lost.
Thank you, Dina, and thank you, Michaela, for reporting out. And group 4.
Yeah, so we had a really great conversation, and a lot of the same themes came up in our group's discussion. But really, while cost is very important for transit options, really picking an option that moves the largest volume of people in the most efficient manner was very important to our group, and also an option that allows the least amount of transfers is really important. So really that one seat option, and then thinking in that same context, exploring that first and last mile connection. So what is that process for folks to get to the transit line? And then what's the option for folks to get off that transit line, either bus or light rail? And then some of the things that we thought could be improved are really just better coordination between C-Tran and TriMet. There seems to be some issues if you take C-Tran across the river and then there's no TriMet bus waiting to take you to your final destination. So better coordination in that sync, so both systems just get in sync with each other. And then as for moving forward, questions to the, as we roll this out, really the cost benefit, like what'll get folks to use transit over what they're currently doing in appealing that manner. So I don't know if I missed anything from our group. If someone wants to chime in.
Well, thank you very much, Victor. We appreciate it. And that all just sounds like just fantastic conversation and wonderful work. Thank you all. Lisa, would you like to move us into a community working group discussion?
That'd be great. Thanks, Jason. So we'll pull the slides up. While the slides are being brought up, I wanted to just really thank those community advisory group members that have been involved in helping us not only move these working groups forward, but who may have attended the orientations this week. It's a long week of evening meetings. So some of you may have attended an Elevating Equity listening session. You may have been at a community working group orientation, and now you might be here tonight. So we do appreciate and see all of the time that you are committing to the program. So the next slide is just really kind of an overview of the community working groups. This isn't the first time that we've talked about community working groups with this community advisory group. These are really meant to be opportunities for continued listening, to ask strategic questions of groups in a particular specific area. We have 4 community working groups right now. We may have additional working groups as the program continues to move forward. But right now our focus is on active transportation, downtown Vancouver, Hayden Island and Marine Drive, and the multimodal commuter experience. So if you could go to the next slide. One thing that is also important is you may recall we had over 500 applications for our community advisory group, and seeing the number of faces on this screen, we were glad to have so many say yes to participate, but we had a lot of additional interest. So one of the questions we did ask was if you were interested in participating in a community working group. So that's how we've been able to at least get our group started. And then we've gone through a bit of a targeted outreach process to make sure that we're continuing to center equity in the groups that we are pulling together, and that we have all of the right kind of voices in the conversation for each of these particular topics. So first, this slide has our downtown Vancouver community working group participant names, as well as organizations. So we have a large group of individuals that will be looking at issues related to downtown Vancouver. And then again, just a real shout out to Michelle, Jasmine, and Whitney for all 3 being willing to participate in this group. And we really envision that integration between those community working groups and the community advisory groups. There'll likely be a little bit deeper dives on some of these topics with these working groups than we might find with the broader community advisory group. So we want to make sure that we're communicating back and forth information between the groups. Next slide. We also have an active transportation community working group. Again, very similar makeup as the other working groups and the community advisory group, a combination of both community at-large participants as well as organizations that we've asked to be representative on that group. We also have 2 CAG members. So again, appreciate Ashton and Robin for your participation. I recently had a conversation with Robin as he was describing his bicycle commute from Vancouver to downtown Portland. And I will admit I had some sweat coming down my face because it sounded a little bit scary. So appreciate those 2 participating with this group. Next slide. Our multimodal commuter community working group. A lot of at-large participants, so a little bit different makeup here. We do have a couple organizations, AAA of Oregon and the Street Trust, which the Street Trust is also the organization that Ashton is at. So we have a member participating on the multimodal. And then again, thank you to Victor and Michaela for being involved in this working group, who both have different commutes. So one is a commute from Portland to Vancouver and Vancouver over to Beaverton. The next group is the Hayden Island Marine Drive Community Working Group. Tom, Ryan, appreciate you both participating in that. We've got some neighborhood association participation, some companies and businesses, as well as those at-large participants. We do have a mix of at-large participants that are both renters and owners. So really trying to ensure that we have good representation, broad and balanced representation. Next slide. Working group demographics. So as we continue to talk about centering equity, we want to walk our talk. And in order to do that, we really want to pay attention to looking at our definition of communities of concern and ensuring that we're paying close attention to what do those demographics look like within each of those working groups. We were really proud of this process. We had both our community engagement team and our equity team working hand in hand to be able to go through and interview over 100 participants to serve in these community working groups. So to say that it's been a busy summer would be a bit of an understatement, and really appreciate the team that's made this happen. So our working group demographics really looked at BIPOC individuals with disabilities, young people, older people, male, female, prefer not to identify gender, Washington, Oregon residents, homeowners, renters, and then neither homeowner nor renter. So next. I think this might be a handoff to my partner, Johnell.
Great. Public comment. Next slide, please. I'm going to read just a couple slides. First, before that, just in terms of upcoming happenings, we have the executive steering group, which will meet on September 15th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. We have the Bi-State Legislative Committee. You'll recall that's the Bi-State Committee of both the Oregon and Washington legislature that oversees this program. They meet on September 17th, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And then, as we indicated earlier, we have the Equity Advisory Group meeting September 20th, 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. All of these meetings are open to the public and available via online or on our website. Next slide, please. So we're going to open up the public comment. I'm just going to read this real quickly. To make a verbal comment, make a live comment via phone, please dial +1 669 900 6833 or 1-408-638-0968.
When can I get on?
68. 1 second, please. I'm going to go through this and we'll recognize you in just a second. Meeting ID is 993-5459-6043. Passcode is 674942. You'll want to dial *9 to raise your hand. I'll call on you to call on participants to provide comments. When I call on you, please dial *6 to unmute yourself. Please provide your name and affiliation. We have roughly about 10 minutes. You'll have 2 minutes for public comment. Next slide, please. To submit comment after the meeting, fill out the comment form on the program website or email your comments to info@interstatebridge.org with CAG Public Comment in the subject line. You may also call 360-859-0494 if you're a resident of Washington, or 503-897-9218, a resident of Oregon, or you also may call our 800 number, 1-888-503-6735, and stake CAG Public Comment in your message. Written comments need to explicitly say CAG Public Comment in the subject line or in the body of the message for them to be identified and distributed to CAG members. All written comments must be received prior to 48 hours in advance of each upcoming meeting in order to be distributed to advisory group members. Comments received after that point will be distributed to members in advance of their next meeting. Next slide, please.
That was it.
Okay, so with that, Brent, if you can tell me first how many folks we have signed up for public comment.
We have one person right now signed up and one person had joined for a short, brief time, but has since left. So the number is 6422.
Okay, 6422, we're gonna unmute you now. And if you want to start, please do so.
Yeah, this is Dave Rowe. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm a commuter from Battleground to Lake Oswego. My comment is a low-profile I-5 drawbridge would be visually be better for Vancouver waterfront businesses and restaurants, other than the tall double-deck bridge that's under consideration. This year, Vancouver waterfront was voted number 13 in Fedora's travel website. I cannot imagine Vancouver would keep that rank if a tall Portland-type Markham Bridge was built on the waterfront. a lower profile I-5 bridge would be vastly more appealing. At this point, IBR design options show light rail transit included in the new bridge into downtown Vancouver. Light rail transit would be a good addition to the city of Vancouver, but future light rail extension would need costly and disruptive construction in Vancouver to expand into Clark County. I asked the Executive Steering Committee on July 15th if the existing railroad owners in Clark County have been included in the IBR study. I'm still waiting for a reply. The Vancouver-Portland Freight Rail Line intersection is the most congested rail intersection on the West Coast. Do you ever wonder why freight locomotives idle for hours in Vancouver? Burlington Northern, Santa Fe, and Union Pacific might be open to solutions to this bottleneck. Passenger rail and freight movement have common solutions. Regional passenger rail service is needed for crossing the Columbia River to reduce climate change and would reduce highway travel on the I-5 bridge and Rose Quarter. High-speed rail also should be included in the transportation solution.
And you're
adding additional rails.
And you're out of
passing
time. Thank you for your
rail-
comment. Brent, do we have someone else signed up for comment?
We do. Last four is 6225.
6225, if you want to unmute yourself, we'll recognize you now. (6225), if you can unmute yourself, we'd welcome your public testimony.
Good afternoon. This is John Lee from Clark County. Thank you for your time and your consideration. It appears based on your slides, and maybe it was truly only focused because the discussion was about transit, but you talked about travel times were a concern, but it appears it's only concern for transit as opposed to the average citizen that's going to and from work in Oregon. And that should be the primary focus of the deliberations of this entire project. The PEMCO survey in 2018 showed that 94% of the people do prefer to use their cars. When it comes to transit, TriMet admitted earlier this year that they do not expect transit use to recover to pre-COVID levels for another 6 years, number one. Number two, the CTRAN recently announced they were curtailing their Cross River Express bus service because demand has dropped precipitously and they do not see a recovery in 2022. Therefore, for the near term, transit should be a minimal consideration, and only in the long term should it be a growing consideration. Basically, here on the West Coast, our density is not one that is one that affords reliable transit use. But thank you for your time and consideration.
Great, thank you. Brent, do we have any other public comment?
We do not have any further public comment.
Great. With that, Lisa, I think I'm turning it back over to you.
I think it might be Lynn. I just saw her unmute.
Thank you, Lisa and Johnell. So thank you everyone for attending. I just want to recap that we had a very productive meeting today. We got a program update from Greg. We had an overview of the equity framework from Johnell, Roberta, and Jake. Thank you all. Kelly provided us with a transit history update. Again, not that focusing on this is what's gone on in the past, not the future, but so that we have a more comprehensive understanding of the previous project. And then we had a really rich breakout discussion with a lot of really good content. I just want to give a shout out to using the Jamboards. That does a really nice job of capturing what everyone says and making it available for all of us to see. A couple of my takeaways were that cost matters and that we're looking for ways to reduce cars traveling across the bridge. So again, really great work. another huge shout out to all of the CAG members who are also serving on the community advisory groups. That's kind of duty above and beyond, but I think it goes to show how much the people on this group are invested in the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for joining. There was a slide earlier that talked about the next 3 meetings of affiliate organizations, and we will see you all again before too long. I'm sorry that Ed's not here to say goodbye. He always has such a warm kind of way of touching our hearts, but thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Have a good evening,
Appreciate it.
everyone.